What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the great folks at nerdtease.ca, and welcome to week 20 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2018 CFL regular season and playoffs. And of course, my splash image is for the lovely folks in the comments section that still can't handle the fact that I'm wearing an NFL hat. Well, just pretend it's the Eskimos. Week 19 was an uncharacteristic struggle for me in the picks. Actually, we're below 500 straight up last week. Only went 1-3 picking the games straight up. And that is very atypical, as especially over the last month and a half, almost 2 months, the picks have been running really hot. We're used to like 4-0 and 3-1, not 1-3. That has us 46-27 straight up on the season. It's still 63%, but that's in the wrong direction. Against the spread and over-under, broke even. 2-2 in both cases. Against the spread now 40-33 on the season. That's 55%. And over-under 2-2. That has us 38-33 with the 2 over-under pushes on the season. That has us 52% along with the 2 pushes. So across the board, under 500 last week, only 5-7 with all of our CFL picks last week. That has us meet 124-93 with the 2 over-under pushes. That's 56.62%. Gotta be better than that. Updating you very quickly on the CFL standings, we've got Ottawa and Hamilton, obviously the 2 teams locked into the playoffs from the East Division. Ottawa at 9-7, Hamilton now at 8-8. Toronto picking up their 4th win last week against Montreal. They are now 4-12. Montreal in the basement at 3-13. In the West, Calgary dropping their 2nd straight game. They're down to 12-4 now. They're still leading the West, but Saskatchewan is right there on their heels at 11-6, so they are very close, only the 1 game behind. Winnipeg coming off the bye, they're at 9-7. BC now also at 9-7. Edmonton pulling up the rear in the West Division, under 500 at 8-9. Our Week 20 quartet of games sees the Calgary Stampeders travel to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers, again coming off of their bye. Ottawa is in Hamilton to take on the Ticats, a rematch from last week. BC is in Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders, and Toronto and Montreal rematch from last week as well, this time in Montreal. Let's start in Winnipeg now. Blue Bombers hosting the Stampeders. Calgary on their first losing streak of the season, having lost their 2nd consecutive game last week. They're 5-2 on the road this season. And again, the first time Calgary's had to face losing back-to-back games all year. Calgary coming off a 29-24 loss to the Roughriders last week. Bo Levi-Mitchell tried to lead the comeback. They almost did. Again, got it within 5 points, within the 1 score. Bo Levi-Mitchell's last 4 passes fall incomplete. That stymies the Stampeders' comeback. Sasky wins. And of course, what I said about Bo Levi-Mitchell last week notwithstanding, there are other problems on this Stampeders team, especially heading towards a playoff that they have to feel like they would be, at least a few weeks ago, the runaway favorite to win the Grey Cup. Don Jackson in the run game. Don Jackson has not topped 55 yards rushing since he came back from his injury. That's 4 straight games now where he's failed to even reach 55 yards and has not had a rushing touchdown since week 3 of the season. That's a long time ago. It's been a really long time since Don Jackson has found pay dirt. Maybe he bucks the schneid this week. Bucks the trend, gets off the schneid. You know what I meant. And it could very well be that I was maybe a little too harsh on Bo Levi-Mitchell last week. I think the injury at wide receiver has finally caught up to the Stampeders, because how could it not? You have 3 starting caliber wide receivers who are not going to be playing this week. And speaking of that, may we actually see Bakari Grant, who just signed onto the Stampeders practice roster because of all the injuries at wide receiver? Is it possible that either this week or next week, I would think certainly next week in the season finale, I would think you'd probably see Bakari Grant get some reps? You want to talk about a team that's going in the exact opposite direction as that? You want to talk about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Winners of 4 consecutive games are Winnipeg. They're also 5-3 at home this season, so definitely above 500, doing their job at home. Winnipeg also has 4 straight performances where they've put up at least 30 points. They're also still coming off of that shutout win over Saskatchewan 2 weeks ago in Week 18, 31-0. The Bombers defense pitching their first shutout since 2006. It was also the first time since, I believe, 2014 that the Roughriders had been shut out. And they score all 31 of their points in the first half. Just ride that out to the win. Matt Nichols was actually pretty unspectacular in a game where his team scored 31 points. He was only 56% passing, threw for $155. He did throw a touchdown. He didn't throw a pick. Those numbers don't exactly jump off of the page. Chris Streveler also threw a touchdown pass in this game. That's actually Streveler's 4th touchdown pass in his last 5 games, so they're really deploying him very well. He also had a great game on the ground, adding 7 carries for 45 yards and a rush touchdown. Adam Bighill up the middle for the Bombers. Beasts and feasts in this football game. 8 tackles, 3 quarterback sacks on Zach Collaros. I think he got all 3 of them on Collaros. He also had a forced fumble, which directly led to a touchdown. He forced the fumble, was taken back all the way the other way for a score. That was a huge part of the 5 turnovers that the Blue Bombers forced in that football game. Betting against a 12-4 Calgary Stampeders team, at least on paper, feels like a fool's errand. Like you're betting against a team that's 12-4. What are you, nuts? Color me convinced by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I really am. I think, as far as I'm concerned, the Bombers are my favorite to go all the way and win the whole thing. It was the Riders. It was kind of between Bombers and Riders, Bombers and Riders. The Bombers have just been there all season for me. They're kind of my dark horse to win it all, and I really like them this week. If the game was in Calgary, I might feel a little bit different, but we're going to take the Blue Bombers here. Let's take Winnipeg at home to beat Calgary. On the line, Winnipeg is 3.5-point favorite at home. So this feels like a really big line to me, but I'm actually going to take it. I mean, I like them to win. It is more than a field goal at -3.5, but the Bombers are 6-2 at home this season against the spread versus the opening line. If you follow Millhouse Sports, you know the opening line was Winnipeg -2. So they were favorites when this line opened. They're 6-2 against the spread at home. So against the opening line, those are great numbers. I think we're going to stick with that. Winnipeg minus the 3.5. Total in the game, 53.5 points. The two teams are a combined 16 and 15 over-under, so no strong lean there. I capped this right at like a low 50, like 50, 51, something like that. And these are essentially the two best scoring defenses in the CFL over the last 4 to 5 weeks. So I think we're going to stick under on it. It's a relatively big number. We're going to stay under 53.5 points in Winnipeg, Calgary. Let's go to Hamilton now, where the Ticats, of course, fresh off of losing Brandon Banks for the season, will rematch the REDBLACKS from last week, this time, of course, on home field. Ottawa won that game last week. They're only 4-4 on the road, so they're certainly not lighting the world on fire away from home. And they've also allowed 31 or more points in 3 of their last 4 games. They are, of course, coming off the aforementioned 35-31 win over Hamilton last week, a 21-6 run for the REDBLACKS in the second half, basically steals victory from what looked like an almost certain defeat at the hands of the Ticats, which really would have made the East Division much more interesting. Just the one passing touchdown from Trevor Harris in that game for the REDBLACKS, but Dominique Davis comes in as the short yardage quarterback. He gets a hat trick of goal line touchdowns, 3 of them for Dominique Davis, and that was really the difference in the game. The pass rush is still lacking for the REDBLACKS. No sacks of Jeremiah Masoli in that football game, but a real hyperactive secondary. 5 pass knockdowns, as well as an interception generated from that REDBLACKS secondary. They really rode that to victory, and that was the difference. Ticats, of course, coming off of that loss. They are above 500 at home this season at 4-3. They have 4 straight games where they've scored at least 31 points, but they've also allowed at least 35 points in 2 of those last 4 games. As far as I'm concerned, that loss cost the Ticats more in futures than it did in the present. I mean, Brandon Banks, gone for the season. They also suffered an injury to Delvin Breaux, who's like their best shutdown corner. Now, I think Breaux is still going to be able to play. I haven't seen anywhere where he's on any kind of injured list. So I think Breaux is still going to play, but if he's limited, that definitely hurts their secondary. Alex Green equaled William Powell's yards per carry in that game last week. They both had 4.1. He just kind of needs more opportunities to run the football, needs the opportunities that come along with that. Powell ran the ball 21 times. Green only ran it 15. 2 more touchdowns from Luke Tasker in this game, who we talked about last week as having, 5 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He adds 2 more. And I mean, Tasker now, pun intended, is going to be tasked with the wide receiver 1 duties in Hamilton now that you don't have that Brandon Banks outlet. You don't have that guy to take the ball deep. Tasker's going to be seeing a lot more volume. He'd be the guy I'd be grabbing in fantasy and CFL for sure. One good thing for Hamilton is, look, if I'm going to be facing a do-or-die situation where I'm trying to win a division or I'm just trying to take a pound of flesh before the playoffs, I would certainly rather be doing that at home than be doing it away. So on the plus side, they do have that going for them. I'm not 100% sure that this Ottawa defense, the way it's playing right now and the way it's played on the road this season, I'm not 100% sure this defense is going to be able to win this football game. Could be another situation or location dependence, I guess. Like if the game was in Ottawa, I may not be taking this, but I think I'm going to go Hamilton in this one. I think they've got to be hungrier. They need revenge for, obviously losing Brandon Banks for the rest of the season. I think they need this game, and I think they're going to take it on home field. So let's take Hamilton at home to beat Ottawa. On the line, Ticats are favored by 3.5 points, same as in our first game, but I think this is where I'm going to have to hedge. It's not a great hedge because it's only 3.5 points, so it's not my most confident play that I've ever made, but I think I got to hedge my bets here and take the Red Blacks plus the 3.5, just in the light of the Brandon Banks injury. If Brandon Banks hadn't been injured, I'd be all over this line. It'd be a little bit higher, I'm sure, but I'd still be all over this Hamilton line, but can't do it in this one. Got to hedge. Got to go Ottawa plus the 3.5. Total in the game, 54 points. 2 teams are an even 16 and 16 over under this season. No lean that way. I personally capped this right around a mid-50, so we're talking about 54, 55, maybe up to a 56. Both of these defenses are just playing so leaky now. Like we said, 2 of Hamilton's last 4 games, they've given up, 30 points or 35? 35, and Ottawa's allowed 31 in 3 of their last 4. So the defenses just aren't playing up to task right now. I think we've got to go over on this, even though it is the biggest total of the week. Let's go over 54 points in Hamilton, Ottawa. Before we move on, folks, we'll take the opportunity, as we always do, to plug our great friends at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca. Use that promo code BWFinest. It's going to save you 15% at checkout. Free shipping on any order over $50 in Canada. And if you're in the US, boom, boom, 2 clicks of a mouse, everything's in US dollars. Today's blend is Japanese Orange Cooler, which I can't remember whether I've talked about on this show or not. Really smooth, nice citrusy flavor, really great aroma. The second you open the bag, it's just like, tangerines and oranges, fantastic. Really nice blend, nice and soothing on my throat because my throat's been sore the last couple of days. This really helps. Nerdtees.ca, use that promo code BWFinest, save yourself 15% at checkout. Find yourself something to love or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Let's go deep into the heart of Rider Nation now. Go to Saskatchewan, where the Roughriders will be playing host to the BC Lions. BC Lions playing really well right now. Winners of 3 straight games, but they're only 2-6 on the road. That's better than what they were the last road game they came out, but still only 2-6 on the road. Now that blowout loss to Hamilton in week 16 is basically their only blemish in their last 4 games. Again, they've been playing really well, but there was that game, that 40-10 loss against Hamilton. Still kind of looming there a little bit, even though they've won 3 straight. Lions coming off of a 10-point decision, 42-32 over the Edmonton Eskimos last week, and it was all about the third quarter in this football game. In the third quarter, first of all, the Lions defense pitching a shutout. They put a 0 on the board, and Devier Posey with 3 receiving touchdowns all in the third quarter, and that was the game right there. Master Travis Lulay outguns Magic Mike Riley. God, I feel like I'm like announcing pro wrestling or something. Lulay outguns Mike Riley in a game that I would have to argue is probably the most important game for both of these teams this season. Lulay played very well. What did he have here? 67% passing, 251 yards, 4 touchdown passes for Lule. Of course, the trio going to Devier Posey. He did throw 2 interceptions, so you'd like to see the interceptions come down, like to see him be a little more careful with the ball. Tyrell Sutton, in 2 games as a BC Lion, has now carried the ball 38 times, put up 203 yards, and found the end zone 2 weeks ago. Did not find the end zone this past week. He is having a heck of a start to his BC Lions career. The turnovers, again, a little bit concerning. They did turn the ball over 4 times in this football game. That is too many, but they generated 4 sacks on the defense. They also had 5 pass knockdowns. That defense is really good. It's a different beast on the road. Riders, of course, won last week. They're 5-3 at home, which is a decent home record. They also have a 27-22 margin of victory in their last 4 games, basically, besides the Winnipeg game. Riders coming off a 29-24 victory over the Calgary Stampeders last week, a huge win, scoring across all 4 quarters for the Riders after getting shut out, propelling them to what was arguably their biggest win of the year. Despite the Riders' injuries on the O-line, Zach Collaros, he got sacked 3 times, but man, he stood in there, he moved the ball very well, spread the offense out incredibly well, put up 352 yards passing. Riders had 4 receivers that had at least 4 catches in that football game, and the running back tandem of Cameron Marshall and Trey Mason carried the ball 18 times, put up 99 yards on the ground, found the end zone. Brett Lothar, 5 for 5 on his field goals. The whole team just kind of felt like they rebounded from that shutout loss and rebounded very well. The BC Lions, despite the fact that they have a very good defense, that defense does kind of disappear on the road. They're nearing 30 points a game against on the road this season, which is obviously vastly far back from how they do at home. And the Riders, I feel like they're in win-out mode to try to catch Calgary. Like, look, we cannot lose again. We have to win out. Let's take the Riders at home to hang a loss on the Lions and get that much closer. In fact, tie the Calgary Stampeders for the division lead. On the line, Saski is favored by 3.5 points at home. I think I've got to take that because I got to be perfectly honest. I don't really trust the Lions defense to hold them in a close game like that. I expect Saski to win. So if you get him under a touchdown, I think that would be the play on this one against the spread. So we're going to take Saski minus the 3.5 points. Total in the game is 51.5 points. The 2 teams 15, 17, and 1 on the over-under, so only the slightest lean towards the under. I personally capped this thing around a high 40, low 50, somewhere in the 50 range. The Riders have gone 3 straight unders at home, and I think that's kind of why I'm going to lean a little bit more towards the under. We're going to take under the 51.5 points, kind of play the percentages, play the trend there. We're going to go under 51.5 in Saski, BC. In the last game we're going to look at, another rematch from last week, sees the Toronto Argos travel to Montreal to take on the Alouettes, battle of the basement dwellers in the East Division. The Argos, of course, did win last week, but they are still winless on the road this season. In fact, the win last week against Montreal was Toronto's only win in their last 8 games overall. That win was a 26-22 decision against the Alouettes in Toronto. James Franklin with a last-minute goal line touchdown, which was the difference in what was otherwise an extremely competitive game. And I full well believe the Argos waited for Montreal to do what they do best in that football game, which was beat themselves. Montreal turning the ball over 3 times, Argos generating those 3 turnovers. Montreal taking 9 penalties for 93 yards. That's way too many. Take advantage of the other team's lack of discipline. Toronto also generating 3 sacks on Manziel. We also saw a nice encore for our Monty Edwards, who I've talked about in the last few weeks as well. Edwards, 6 catches, 106 yards receiving. That led the team. It was better than S.J. Green. Also has receptions of 40 yards or more now in back-to-back games. Take a look at the home side. The Owls are losers of 5 consecutive games, only 1-7 at home this season. Obviously, it's been a bad year for both of these teams, but, especially for Montreal. 3 of Montreal's last 4 losses, however, have been 1-possession games. They've been in these football games. They just can't find a way to finish. Last week, another 4-point loss, tough loss against the Argos. Again, just a rouge in the fourth quarter. Just a single point in the fourth quarter just was not enough to hang on to the lead that they had going in. And this is just the kind of season that it's been for Montreal. The final drive of the game, they're down 4 points. Short kick from Toronto. I think it only got to Montreal's 25. A nice return sets them up with a short field. They actually get the ball to Toronto's 36-yard line, but from there, intentional grounding penalty on Manziel and a sack to end the game. And people ask me why I don't wear an Alouettes hat on camera. Despite that final drive, look, Johnny Manziel outplayed James Franklin in the pass game. Manziel threw for 77% in this game, 222 yards, had a touchdown, did have the pick. William Stanback also got the job done on the ground, had a 72-yard run in this game, a huge run for them, 10 carries for $118. You just got to give him the rock a little more. The numbers in this game absolutely lead towards the Argos, and the biggest number of all being the fact that Montreal is giving up about 35 points against per game on their own field. That's disgusting, and you can't win that way. But, as I always say, do unto others as they have already done unto you. This is Montreal's home finale. They don't want to go out on their home field and get blown out by a team that's just as bad as they are. Slight upset, although not according to the line, but I'm definitely going to take Montreal in this football game. Let's take the Alouettes at home. I'm riding all 4 home teams this week. Montreal beats the Argos in Montreal. The line in this game is currently set at a pick'em, so obviously we like Montreal to win. We're going to take Montreal as a pick'em. Total in the game, 49.5 points. The two teams are a combined 12 and 19 over under this season. Just goes to show how much the offenses on both sides have really struggled. And yet I've still capped this somewhere around a high 40, low 50, simply because the defenses have also been terrible. But in these two teams' last 10 games head-to-head, I think this goes back as far as like 2016, something like that, so the last few years. But the last 10 head-to-head, these two teams have gone 50 points or more one time. That's a pretty darn strong trend, and I'm definitely going to lean on it. So we're going to stick under the 49.5 points in Montreal-Toronto. There you go, folks. Those are your Week 20 picks in the CFL in 2018. We're going to go over the picks here with you one more time. I like Winnipeg at home to get the win over Calgary. And I'm hammering Winnipeg minus the 3.5 against the spread in a game that stays under 53.5 points. I like the Ticats at home to beat Ottawa, but I'm hedging my bets there and taking Ottawa plus 3.5 against the spread in a game that goes over 54 points. I like Saskatchewan at home to get the win over the BC Lions. We're hammering Saskatchewan minus 3.5 against the spread in a game that stays under 51.5 points, and we're taking Montreal also at home to beat the Toronto Argos, taking the Alouettes as a pick'em against the spread in a game that stays under 49.5 points. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a late recording, about 9 to 10 hours later than I typically would be recording this episode. You know, work, real life, adulting gets in the way. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch the Week 20 episode. We got 1 week to go after this, Week 21, the last week of the CFL regular season. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the great folks at Nerd Tees. We will see you again next week. Season finales, playoffs are so close.